As I indicated to you last week, given the nature of where we are in our society at the moment and some of the ongoing challenges that Canadian culture and the country is dealing with in terms of addressing some of the legacy of the Aboriginal residential schools in the country. And we haven't talked a whole lot about Aboriginal issues and First Nation issues here at Bedford United Church over the years, and we thought, this, and then given what was going on at Attawapiskat as well, we thought it'd be really, really appropriate for us to look at our relationship with the First Nations people of our country. The United Church of Canada has a bit of a history. We operated a number of residential schools on the West Coast. But the United Church of Canada is one of the first denominations in the country also to try and really engage in a healing of our relationship with the First Nations people of Canada. One of the first churches to offer a distinct apology. We have a whole sort of governance structure within the United Church that is focused on the Aboriginal peoples as well. So this morning, last week, we thought we're going to try to encourage a deepening of our respect, our understanding of our relationship with the First Nations people of Canada. And this morning, I'm absolutely delighted to have with us Dorene Bernard. Dorene is a highly sought-after speaker with regards to First Nations issues, but also with regards to the whole residential school legacy. She has firsthand experience of that whole legacy, and she often speaks to communities about how the whole Canadian culture can enter into a deeper space of healing, of peace and reconciliation with regards to the First Nations people. She's a wonderful gal. You've met her already. Thank you for bringing your animals. They are just adorable and wonderful symbols of the richness and wealth of your culture, Dorene, and it's just such a pleasure. Let's give her a big hand as we welcome her to join us this morning.
Thank you.
Dorene.
It was a beautiful ceremony. Thank you for allowing me to be here. So I thought I have 20 minutes to tell you about our history. So I thought I'd start off with where we come from, and then give you a little try to touch base on some of the main parts of this presentation. So where we come from, as Mi'kmaq people, we originated here in Mi'kmawey, which is Atlantic Canada and part of the USA, 13,000 years ago. We have the oldest paleo-archaeological site in Debert that's been dated for 13,500 years. So this is our territory where our people originated. Our ancestors are connected to these lands for over 13,000 years. Traditional governance of our Mi'kmaq was the Grand Council. The Grand Council was made up of chiefs from 7 districts that covered all Atlantic provinces. And we had a Council of Gijus, which were the grandmothers. They seem to have lost that role today. We had the history keeper was the wampum belt readers, the ones that took care of our history, documenting our history, because it's all oral traditions, oral history. And we had the peace chief and the war chief, and these were all connected to throughout Mi'kmawey. In our territory, which includes this Halifax, is called Shubenacadie District, which our community in Indian Brook is part of that, where those treaties were signed in 1752 at that water down by that river, which is very sacred to us. Life was a ceremony. All aspects of our lives were surrounded by ceremony. We celebrated the conception and carrying a child and the birth of a child, naming ceremonies, rites of passage, all through life. We had ceremonies to honor the earth, honor the water, our food, our medicines, everything that we took from the earth. And these, we had ceremony and ritual to honor the land. Mi'kmaq lived in harmony with Mother Earth in all our relations. What has happened to us? So since the beginning, pre-Confederation, historical trauma that impacted our Mi'kmaq nations, colonialism, acts of genocide, introduction of diseases, introduction of religions, illegalization of ceremony, culture, language, the government policies to exterminate us, to assimilate us under the Indian Act, the welfare dependency, child welfare system, and the residential schools. The impacts of the residential schools that on our people and throughout Canada and in the United States and Australia and other parts of the world as well it has big impact on Indigenous peoples worldwide. The residential school opened in 1840, the first one in 1840, and the last one closed in 1996. Shubenacadie Indian Residential School ran from 1929 to 1967. My grandmother and my father were students in 1929, and I was the student there in 1967 when it closed. My mother was there in the 40s. There's over 100 people in my family that went to the residential school in Shubenacadie, and out of all the ones that went there, I had to estimate, because some of them are gone now, most of them are gone, but I estimated that we as a family spent 152 years collectively in the residential school in Shubenacadie. Some children as young as 4 years old were forced to attend until they were 16 years old. Children lost their families, their teachings, their culture, their language. Parents lost their children and their role as a parent. Grandparents lost their role, their cultural role as grandmothers and grandfathers. And all families were impacted by the loss of our cultural teachings. I didn't learn these teachings until I was well into my 30s. I didn't get my spirit name until I was 38. This is something that's given to a child when the child is born. So there's a lot of things that we're catching up on and just learning. So the Catholic Church and INAC and other churches had control over Indian children's education. Children were severely abused, mind, body, and spirit, as students in these schools. The losses at the residential school: the loss of love, the loss of innocence as a child, the loss of language, culture, traditions, the loss of ceremonies to celebrate life, our spirituality, the loss of our rights as a child, the loss of rights to education, the loss of Mi'kmaq identity, the loss of self-esteem, and the loss of our parents, our siblings, our grandparents, and our community. The impacts of residential school that have been experienced by us as survivors and still exist today. The loss of family connection, family bonds. I think that was one of the biggest ones for me, was our sense of family, where we were spread out and didn't have that connection. The weak and broken bonds of love and trust and emotional attachment, which every child needs. The lack of education, the lack of identity, anger, resentment, fear, chronic addictions, family violence. The highest rates of children in care, the highest rates of suicide, the highest rates of incarceration, the highest rates of missing and murdered men and women, and the highest rates of diseases today. Healing from our past and creating a new legacy. The survivors gathered to talk and to heal from our experiences, to share our experiences. Residential school survivors sued Canada for past systemic abuses, racism. The Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples was formed, and the report came out in 1996. How many people are familiar with that report? Sits on a government shelf somewhere. Lots of, the creation of the Healing Foundation. You know, the Aboriginal Healing Foundation did a lot of work to help us to heal in 1998. Canada apologizes to the residential school survivors on June 11th, 2008. And a week later, Canada amends the Canadian Human Rights Act to remove the exemption of natives living on reserve under the Indian Act, to finally give us human rights 1 week after the apology on June 18, 2008. So up until that point, we didn't have human rights that applied to us while living on a reserve. Mi'kmaq Nation striving to regain our language, our culture and traditions, and to begin to thrive, not just to survive. Mi'kmaq take control over their education for their children. And working together to heal our relationships through truth and reconciliation, healing the intergenerational impacts. The survivors gather to heal for themselves and their families. Survivors Residential School commemoration events brings honoring and understanding within families. Because up until that point, there was some survivors that didn't even let their family know that they were survivors. They were ashamed. And these commemorations brought that forward and helped families to heal and understand one another. Community healing and wellness programs were initiated to continue family healing. And developing curriculum. I worked on some things, developing curriculum for teaching about the residential schools and reconciliation for schools and for communities and universities, both on and off reserve. Working together to right the wrongs of history, to clear a path of healing for reconciliation for our grandchildren and our future generations. And reviving Mi'kmaq culture, our heritage, our language, our ceremonies to heal our nation. Working together with our Indigenous people and our allies to create a better society that respects each other and our Mother Earth in all our relations. In my own experience, today we are striving to, our biggest fight for survival is for our Mother Earth. And I spend a lot of time talking about the sacredness of water. And today I came and I sing these beautiful songs and prayers for the water. And yesterday I met with people from New Brunswick, Maliseet, and Mi'kmaq people, and our allies from all over to come together to pray and to talk about what we can do to help one another, to save our Mother Earth. In our territory, we're fighting for the Shubenacadie River, for the life of the river. And on May 14th, I'm going to be doing a water walk, the Shubenacadie River Water Walk from Maitland, where the river comes in through the Cobequid Bay. And we're going to carry the water in prayer and walk for that whole week until we get to Grand Lake, where the water goes into the Grand Lake in Wellington, just outside of Halifax here. And anybody's welcome to join me on that walk. can find us on the highway. We'll be walking with an eagle staff and a bucket of water and praying. So I'd like to say thank you very much for inviting me here today just to talk a little bit about where we come from, who we are, and where we are going. We have to know those things so that we can go on in the future and teach our children to love and respect. Love, respect, courage, humility, honesty, wisdom, and truth. Thank you.
Quite an undertaking this morning to stay within a certain time framework with a lot of material. Dorene, I can understand why you are such a sought-after speaker around Aboriginal issues. You bring such a beautiful spirit of peace and reconciliation in your own being, and at the same time, so much wisdom in terms of sharing with our community and the wider community, both some of the history, the challenges, but also the ways forward. Thank you so much. You've been just wonderful this morning. We gather in the tradition sometimes a way of honoring one of our First Nations members is to provide them with some sacred tobacco to be used in the sacred peace pipe, and so allow us to give that little token of appreciation to you.
Thank you very much.
We'll have another little gift as well later as well, but that's a little symbolic way of saying we honor you so much.
This is a very important way. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give Dorene a big hand once again.
We'd like to lift up another First Nations piece from our own hymn book, More Voices. And the refrain is very singable, very easy to sing. So if you start to catch on, please join your voices. Hey, hey, Anna. Hey, hey, Anna. Hey, hey, Anna. Hey, hey, oh. Hey, hey, oh. I walk in beauty, yes I do, yes I do. I talk in beauty, yes I do, yes I do. I sing